The night was cold and dark, the kind of night that made even the strongest creature hurry home. Rain poured from the black sky, hitting the metal streets of the alien city and filling the air with the smell of wet dust. Shops had closed hours ago, lights fading one by one until only the faint glow of street lamps remained. And under one of those lamps, sitting on the hard ground with her knees pulled to her chest, was a small alien girl. She had no shoes. Her bare feet pressed against the freezing metal floor. Her thin dress clung to her skin. Soaked through by the rain, her long hair stuck to her face, hiding her eyes. But when a shadow passed by, she lifted her head. Her eyes, large and bright, even in the dark, watched the stranger with a mix of hope and fear. No one stopped. Some walked faster when they saw her. Others looked away, pretending she wasn't there. She was used to it, ever since her father had died. Her stepmother had made it clear she wasn't wanted. "You're useless. A burden," the woman had spat. Before throwing her out, "Don't come back." The girl didn't know how long she had been sitting there. Her fingers were numb, her lips trembling. She hugged herself tighter, trying to keep the warmth in. But the rain was winning. Her stomach growled, empty since yesterday. She pressed her forehead to her knees, whispering to herself, "Don't cry, don't cry." Footsteps echoed through the wet street. A tall figure walked toward her, a human man with a hood pulled over his head. He was carrying a small bag, his boots splashing through puddles. When he reached the street lamp, he slowed down, his eyes narrowing as he saw her small shape. For a moment, he thought she might be waiting for someone, but then he noticed the way she shivered, the way her lips were pale. He took a step closer. "You all right, kid?" he asked, his voice low but gentle. She hesitated, looking at him as if deciding whether to run or stay. Humans were rare in this part of the city, and she had been told they were dangerous, but something in his voice didn't sound like danger. It sounded warm. Her lips parted, and the words slipped out before she could stop them. "Be my dad. I won't misbehave." The man froze, his heart tightening at the desperation in her voice. He crouched down so they were eye to eye. Up close, he could see the faint bruises on her arms, the dirt on her face. "Where's your family?" he asked softly. She shook her head, water dripping from her hair. "They don't want me," she whispered. Her voice was small, like a candle flame about to go out. He glanced around, but the street was empty. No one was coming for her. No one cared. Something inside him told him to keep walking, to stay out of trouble, but his legs refused to move away. Instead, he took off his jacket and wrapped it around her tiny frame. She flinched at first, then slowly relaxed into the warmth. "You can't stay out here," he said. "Come on. I'll take you somewhere dry." She hesitated again, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. But the rain was cold, and his jacket smelled safe like coffee and old books. She stood up slowly, her legs weak, almost stumbling. He caught her before she fell. They walked together through the wet streets. Every step splashed water, the sound of the rain their only company. She kept glancing up at him, as if trying to figure out why he hadn't left her. When they reached a small, run-down apartment building, he led her inside. The warm air hit her skin, making her shiver harder. He unlocked his door and stepped aside for her to enter. She stopped at the threshold, gripping the jacket tightly. "Why?" she asked. He frowned. "Why? What? Why are you helping me?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "Because no one helped me when I needed it." She didn't fully understand, but she stepped inside anyway. Her eyes darted around the small living room mold furniture. A small heater humming in the corner. It wasn't much, but it felt warmer than any place she had known in years. She didn't know that this night would change her life, and he didn't know that by opening his door, he had also opened a chapter he could never close. Somewhere outside, hidden in the rain, a pair of eyes was watching them. And those eyes did not belong to a friend. The girl stood just inside the doorway, her small feet dripping water onto the floor. She looked like she might run at any second, her eyes moving from the old couch to the tiny kitchen in the corner. The man closed the door softly behind them, careful not to make her jump. "You're safe here," he said, his voice steady. She didn't answer. Instead, she hugged his jacket tighter, as if afraid he might take it back. Her clothes were still soaked, and the wet fabric clung to her skin. "Sit," he said, pointing to the couch when she didn't move. He walked past her and placed a folded blanket on the seat. He went to the small cupboard, pulling out a towel. "You'll get sick if you stay like that," he said, handing it to her slowly. She reached out and took the towel. Her fingers brushed his, and he noticed how cold they were, like ice. She began drying her hair in quick, nervous movements. Every now and then, she glanced at him, as if expecting him to suddenly shout at her. But he didn't. He moved to the kitchen and put water on the stove. Steam soon rose from the pot, filling the room with warmth. "Do you like soup?" he asked. She nodded once. "Good," he said. "It's all I've got right now." While the water boiled, he studied her more closely. She was small, maybe 8 or 9 years old in human terms. Her skin had a faint blue tint, common to her alien species, but what caught his eye was the silver mark on her wrist, an oval shape. Oh, almost like a coin pressed into her skin. He had seen marks like that before. They weren't tattoos or scars. They were identity seals, given only to members of certain ancient alien families. It meant she wasn't just a random street child. She belonged to someone powerful, someone who might come looking for her. The soup was ready. He poured it into a bowl and handed it to her. She held it with both hands, breathing in the steam. Before taking small sips, he sat in the chair opposite her. "Want to tell me your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Leora." He smiled slightly. "I'm Daniel." Her eyes studied him for a moment longer, as if deciding whether to trust him with more. Finally, she said, "My father." "He's gone." Her voice wavered. "My stepmother. She told me I'm not worth food or a bed." Her fingers tightened around the bowl. "She told me no one will ever want me." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had met cruel people before, but something about this girl's voice made his chest ache. "She's wrong," he said firmly. Leora looked up at him with cautious hope. Then, "Can I stay?" she asked, almost in a whisper. He didn't answer right away. He knew what it meant. Taking her in could mean trouble if her family had power. They could make his life very difficult. Before he could speak, there was a sudden, heavy knock on the door, 3 sharp hits, followed by silence. Leora froze, her eyes wide. Daniel stood and moved quietly to the door, opening it just enough to see. 2 alien men stood in the hallway. They were tall, dressed in dark coats, water dripping from their shoulders. One of them spoke, his voice deep and smooth. "Evening, sir. We're looking for a runaway." Daniel kept his face calm. "I haven't seen anyone." The second man pulled out a small hologram device. A blurry image of Leora appeared, soaked, barefoot, sitting under a street lamp. "You sure?" the man asked. "She's dangerous. Better if she's taken back to where she belongs." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "She's just a child," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "She's not just a child." The first man replied coldly. "She carries something that doesn't belong to her." The silver mark. Daniel realized, if they took her, she'd never come back. "I'll keep an eye out," Daniel said finally, closing the door before they could push further. When he turned around, Leora was gone from the couch. He found her hiding behind the small table, trembling. "They'll take me back," she whispered. "If I go back, I'll disappear." Daniel crouched down, meeting her eyes. "Then you won't go back," he said quietly. For the first time since he'd met her, she let out a small, shaky breath. He pulled the blanket around her and sat on the floor beside Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside, the decision had been made. He would keep her safe. No matter who came looking. What he didn't know was that the knock tonight was only the beginning. The real danger hadn't arrived yet, and when it did, it would change both their lives forever. The rain outside had slowed to a steady drizzle. The sound was softer now. But inside Daniel's apartment, the air was heavy. Leora sat curled up on the couch, the blanket wrapped tight around her small frame. Her big eyes followed Daniel as he paced the room, his mind running through possibilities. He knew the two men from earlier would not give up easily. They had the look of people sent to finish a job, not street thugs, not bounty hunters, but professionals, and that meant they would be back. Leora's hands fidgeted under the blanket. Her voice was so soft that Daniel almost didn't hear it. "They were from my stepmother," she whispered. Daniel stopped pacing and turned to her. "You're sure?" She nodded slowly, her wet hair sticking to her cheeks. She told them to find me and bring me back." Her voice shook as she continued. "She wants the house, the money, everything my father left, but the law says she can't take it while I'm alive." Daniel's stomach tightened. So it wasn't just cruelty, was greed. Her stepmother wasn't just trying to punish her. She wanted her gone permanently, Leora, he said carefully. "That mark on your wrist. It's important, isn't it?" She looked down at the silver oval pressed into her skin. "It's the seal of my father's bloodline," she said quietly. "It's proof that I am his child. Without it, she can't claim anything." Daniel knelt beside the couch. "That's why they said you carry something that doesn't belong to you." She nodded. "She thinks it belongs to her now." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet was broken only by the faint hum of the heater. Then Daniel stood, his voice firm. "You're not going back. Not while I'm here." Leora's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. She wanted to believe him, but the fear in her heart was stronger. "What if they come again?" she asked. Daniel gave a small smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. "Then they'll find out I'm not as easy to deal with as I look." That night, Daniel set up an old sleeping bag on the floor beside the couch. He stayed awake longer than he meant to, listening for sounds outside. Every creak of the building made him tense. But the hours passed and the storm faded. Finally, exhaustion pulled him into a light sleep. It was almost morning when a faint metallic tap came at the window. Daniel's eyes opened instantly. The sound came again, deliberate this time. He moved quietly, careful not to wake Leora, peeking through the curtain. He saw nothing but the wet street below, then movement. A shadow slipped into the alley beside the building, disappearing into the darkness. Daniel's gut told him it wasn't random. Someone was checking the building, looking for a way in. He closed the curtain and stepped back, his mind already working on what to do next. By sunrise, Leora was awake. She sat cross-legged on the couch, sipping the leftover soup he had reheated for her. "You didn't sleep," she said, noticing. The tiredness in his eyes didn't feel like it. He replied with a shrug. "Do you have somewhere to go?" She asked. "Yes," he lied. "But first, I need to make sure no one's watching the building." He left her inside and went down to the street. Everything looked normal at first. People heading to work, street cleaners sweeping water away. But when he turned the corner, he spotted one of the same men from last night. The man was leaning against a wall, pretending to smoke. But his eyes kept scanning the building. Daniel walked past without looking directly. His mind already certain Leora was in real danger. Back upstairs, he told her to pack whatever she could carry. She gave a sad little laugh. "I don't have anything." The truth of it hit him harder than he expected. No clothes, no toys, nothing she could call her own. He grabbed an old backpack from his closet and stuffed it with a few of his t-shirts, a water bottle, and a flashlight. It wasn't much, but it was something. They left through the back of the building. Daniel took side streets he knew well. Moving quickly but calmly, Leora stayed close to him, gripping the strap of the backpack. Every so often, she looked over her shoulder, her eyes darting nervously after nearly an hour. They reached a small repair shop tucked between two warehouses. The sign above the door was faded, but Daniel knew the owner. Inside, the air smelled of oil and old metal. A man in a grease-stained coat looked up from a workbench. "Daniel," he said with a grin. "Been a while, need a favor," Daniel replied, glancing toward Leora. The man's smile faded, replaced with understanding. "She's in trouble." "Yes, and people are looking." The man nodded once. "I've got a place in the back. No one will find her there." Daniel looked at Leora. "You'll be safe here while I figure out our next move." Her small hands tightened on the backpack. "Promise you'll come back?" she asked. He met her gaze. "I promise," as he turned to leave. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The men looking for Leora weren't just patient, they were determined, and now they knew she wasn't alone, which meant their next move would be faster and more dangerous. The safe room in the back of the repair shop was small. It had a narrow bed, a single window covered by thick curtains, and a shelf filled with old tools and boxes. It wasn't much, but compared to the wet streets she had slept on, it felt like a palace to Leora. Daniel's friend, a man named Rurik, brought her a clean towel and a set of clothes that were too big but warm. She changed quickly, still half expecting someone to burst in and take them away when she stepped out. Rurik gave her a small plate of bread and warm tea. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, as if the food might vanish if she rushed. Daniel stood nearby, watching her. It was the first time since they met that she looked even a little comfortable. "You can rest here," he said gently. She nodded, her eyes still darting toward the door. Even in safety, her body carried the memory of danger. Over the next 2 days, she began to adjust. She learned that Rurik had a small kitchen in the shop where he made thick vegetable stew. She learned how to sweep the dusty floor and how to help sort bolts and screws by size. In return, Rurik taught her little things: how to use a screwdriver, how to clean rust from metal. Her small hands moved carefully, and her eyes lit up whenever she managed to fix something. Daniel visited every evening, always bringing something for her: a small chocolate bar, a clean pair of socks, sometimes just a new story to tell. At first, she barely spoke, listening more than talking, but slowly she began asking questions. Why do humans smile even when they are sad? Why do you say please before asking for something? Her curiosity made Daniel smile. He explained that humans did those things because kindness mattered. Even when life was hard, at night though, her fear returned. She would wake from nightmares, breathing fast, her small fingers clutching the blanket. Sometimes she called out for her father. Sometimes she whispered, "Don't let them take me." Daniel would sit beside her until she calmed. He didn't tell her that he'd seen strange shadows moving outside the shop on more than one occasion. If she knew, she wouldn't sleep at all. On the 4th morning, Daniel arrived earlier than usual. His expression was tense. Rurik noticed it immediately. "What happened?" he asked. "They're getting closer," Daniel said quietly, glancing at Leora, who was busy lining up screws on the counter. "I saw one of them outside the district, asking questions about a human man with a young alien girl." Rurik frowned. "We can keep her here for a while longer, but if they're asking around, it's only a matter of time." Daniel nodded. "I need a plan before they force my hand." That afternoon, Leora and Daniel took a short walk in the alley behind the shop. The sky was cloudy but dry, and the air smelled faintly of machine oil and baked bread from a nearby bakery. She walked beside him, holding a small piece of bread Rurik had given her. "Do you think I could go to school one day?" she asked suddenly. Daniel glanced down at her, surprised. "School?" She nodded. "I never went. My stepmother didn't want to waste money on me." Daniel's chest tightened at the thought. Yeah. He said after a moment, "One day you will." Her small smile faded quickly, replaced by worry. But what if they find me first? He stopped walking, crouched down, and looked her in the eyes. "Then I'll be here," he said firmly. "You're not alone anymore." She held his gaze for a moment before nodding. It was the first time she didn't look away when someone promised her safety. That evening, Daniel stayed longer than usual. They sat at the small workbench, her sorting washers while he fixed a broken lamp. The warm glow of the bulb filled the room when it finally worked again. Leora clapped softly. "You fixed it." He grinned. "So did you. You helped." For a brief moment, it almost felt normal. But normal didn't last long, just as Daniel was about to leave. A loud crash echoed from the front of the shop. Rurik's voice called out sharply, "Who's there?" Daniel motioned for Leora to hide. She slipped under the workbench, pulling the blanket with her, her breathing quick and shallow. Voices followed the deep, controlled tones of men who didn't need to shout to be threatening. Daniel's muscles tensed as he stepped into the main room. Two men stood there, the same ones who had knocked on his apartment door. Rurik blocked their way, his arms crossed. "We're looking for someone," one of them said calmly. "She's not here." Rurik replied flatly. The second man's eyes scanned the room slowly. "Funny," he said, "because we heard she's been seen nearby." Daniel's hand twitched, ready to act if they took another step. But after a long, tense moment, the men turned and walked out. The sound of the door closing was like a slow release of pressure in the room. Daniel walked back to the workbench and crouched down. Leora was still under the table, her eyes wide. "They're not gone for good," he said quietly. She nodded, her small hands gripping the blanket tightly. She didn't need to be told. They both knew the danger was only growing. That night, as Daniel lay awake on the shop's small couch, he made a silent promise to himself. He wasn't just going to protect her. He was going to make sure her stepmother could never hurt her again. 2 days passed after the men came to Rurik's shop. Daniel knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. If the stepmother's men were already checking the district, it was only a matter of time before they searched every shop, every alley. He decided they needed supplies, food, clothes for Leora, maybe even a way to leave the city if things got worse. Early in the morning, he told Leora they were going out. Her eyes widened in worry. "What if they see us?" "We'll be careful," he said. "Stay close to me, and if I tell you to run, you run." She nodded, clutching the small backpack he had given her. The market was busy. Its narrow streets crowded with stalls selling everything from glowing fruit to rusty old tools. The smell of baked bread mixed with the scent of alien spices. Vendors shouted out their prices, trying to draw in customers. Daniel kept Leora close, one hand resting on her shoulder. For a while, it almost felt normal till he noticed a familiar face in the crowd. One of the men from before was leaning against a stall, pretending to examine a rack of scarves. But his eyes weren't on the scarves, they were scanning the crowd. Daniel's stomach tightened. Without making it obvious, he turned Leora toward another aisle, but as they moved, a second man stepped into view at the other end of the row. They were boxed in. "Daniel?" Leora's voice was a whisper. "Keep walking," he said. His voice calm, but his eyes alert. He guided her toward a small gap between two stalls. They slipped through, brushing past hanging cloth and stacked baskets, but the men were moving. Now, their calm act gone, one of them shouted, "There! The girl!" Heads turned in the crowd, but no one stepped in to help. Daniel grabbed Leora's hand and ran, weaving between shoppers. The market's noise became a blur, the pounding of his boots, the quick breaths of the girl, the heavy footsteps behind them. They turned a corner and nearly collided with a cart full of fruit. The vendor yelled, but Daniel didn't stop. He pushed through another stall. knocking over a stand of bottles, glass shattering behind them. Leora clung to him. Her legs, struggling to keep up, they're right behind us. She gasped. I know, he said, scanning ahead, looking for a way out. A narrow set of steps led up to a maintenance walkway. He pulled her toward it, taking the stairs 2 at a time from above. The market looked like a sea of moving colors and shapes, but Daniel's focus was on the rooftops ahead. He knew if they could cross them, they might lose their pursuers. The men reached the base of the stairs, shouting. Daniel didn't wait. He lifted Leora onto his back. Hold on tight. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He sprinted across the metal walkway, the boards rattling under his weight. One wrong step could send them crashing down. But there was no time to think. The sound of footsteps followed. Getting closer, Daniel spotted a low rooftop ahead and jumped down. Landing hard but keeping his balance, Leora gasped. But he didn't slow. They crossed 2 more rooftops before reaching a gap too wide to jump. Daniel stopped, breathing hard. Below them was a narrow alley filled with broken crates and trash. We're going down, he said, lowering Leora first. She slid down the side of the building, landing on a pile of old fabric. Daniel followed, his boots hitting the ground with a dull thud. The alley led to a side street. They darted through it, finally slowing when the sound of pursuit faded. Daniel pressed his back to the wall, listening. Nothing but the hum of distant traffic. He let out a slow breath, his heart still pounding. Leora leaned against the wall. Trying to catch her breath, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes wide. I thought they had us, she whispered. They almost did, Daniel said. He crouched down, looking at her seriously. This means they know where we shop. They're watching the market, maybe the whole area. So? We have to leave, she asked. He nodded. Tonight, they returned to the shop through the back streets. Rurik was waiting, his expression dark when he saw them. They were here again while you were gone, he said. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we have. No time to waste. That night, as the city lights flickered under the cloudy sky, Daniel packed a small bag. Leora watched him, her voice quiet. Where will we go? Somewhere they can't follow, he said. But even as he spoke, he knew it wouldn't be that simple. The men chasing them weren't just after the girl, they were after what she represented. And they would keep coming until they got it. Leora tightened the straps of her backpack. Her small voice broke the silence. Daniel, if you're with me, I'm not scared. He looked at her and gave a small nod. Then we'll make sure I'm always with you. But in the shadows outside, a figure stood watching the shop. A silent messenger, ready to tell the hunters where their prey would run next. Night had fallen by the time Daniel decided it was safe to move. The streets outside the repair shop were quiet. But he knew it wouldn't last. The men hunting them would come back, and next time they wouldn't just knock or follow, they would take. Rurik stood at the door, his large frame blocking most of the view to the street. You sure about this? He asked. Daniel nodded. We can't stay here. They're too close. He turned to Leora, who was already wearing her small backpack. Her eyes were wide but steady. Stay close to me, Daniel said. No matter what, I will, she replied softly. They slipped into the night, moving through narrow alleys instead of main roads. The smell of damp metal and trash hung in the air every few steps. Daniel glanced behind them. No one yet, but his instincts told him they were being watched. After nearly an hour, they reached the edge of the industrial district. Beyond it stretched open land, patches of grass, scattered old buildings, and the dark shapes of low hills in the distance. Leora slowed her steps, glancing at the unfamiliar view. Where are we going? Daniel pointed toward the hills. There's an old safe house out there. Used to belong to a friend of mine. No one knows about it now. They crossed a small bridge over a shallow stream. The water reflected the faint light of the moon, Leora's step splashed quietly as she tried to keep up with his pace. It was colder here, the wind sharper without the walls of the city to block it. Daniel kept one arm around her, sharing what warmth he could. After another 20 minutes, they reached a low, weathered building hidden behind thick bushes. The walls were faded and cracked, the roof patched with sheets of metal. It looked abandoned. "This is it?" Leora asked, tilting her head. Daniel smiled faintly. "Sometimes the safest place is the one no one thinks is worth finding." Inside, the air was dry and smelled faintly of old wood. There was a small fireplace, a wooden table, and a narrow bed in the corner. Daniel lit a lantern, filling the room with soft light. Leora set her backpack down and sat on the bed, running her fingers over the rough blanket. "It's warm," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "It'll do." That night, for the first time since she had met him, Leora slept deeply. No sudden waking. No frightened whispers. Daniel sat in a chair near the door, keeping watch. The sound of the wind outside was steady, almost peaceful, but his mind stayed alert. He knew they had bought time, not safety. The next morning, Leora woke to the smell of food. Daniel had found an old pot and was cooking a simple stew over the fire. She ate with quiet joy, her small hands cupping the warm bowl after breakfast. Daniel showed her the small yard behind the house. Grass grew wild, and a single tree stood near the edge, its branches reaching toward the sky. She wandered around, touching the bark, staring at the way sunlight broke through the leaves. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel watched her, thinking how strange it was to see a child amazed by something so simple. For the next few days, they settled into a slow rhythm. Daniel taught her how to gather dry wood, how to start a small fire, how to boil water. She asked questions about Earth's home, his childhood, the food humans ate. Sometimes he made her laugh with strange human sayings. In those moments, the danger felt far away, almost unreal. But danger doesn't vanish just because you can't see it. On the fourth night, as Daniel sat by the fire, he heard a faint crunch of footsteps outside. It was too slow, too deliberate to be an animal. He reached for the old hunting knife he kept nearby. Moving to the window, he saw nothing at first. Then a shadow moved between the trees. It was gone in a second, but he knew what he saw. When he checked the ground in the morning, he found footprints in the dirt. They were fresh, leading toward the house and then away. He didn't tell Leora right away. She was sitting in the yard, trying to weave wild grass into a circle. Her smile was small, but real. He didn't want to take it away yet. That evening, after she had gone to bed, he sat by the door. "Rurik's voice echoed in his memory if they're asking questions. It's only a matter of time. Daniel knew they couldn't stay here much longer. The safe house had given them a few days of peace, but the hunters were closing in again. As the firelight flickered against the walls, Leora stirred in her sleep. Her voice was soft, almost too quiet to hear. "Don't leave me," she murmured. Daniel looked at her and made the same promise he had made the first night they met. "I won't," but deep down, he knew the next step would be the hardest yet if they wanted to survive. They would have to stop running and face the danger head-on. The morning was colder than usual. Sharp wind cut through the air as Daniel stood outside the safe house. He knew they couldn't hide any longer. The hunters would keep coming, and Leora would never be free unless they ended this. That meant facing the woman who had started it all, her stepmother. Leora stood in the doorway. Wrapped in her blanket, she looked small, but her eyes were steady. "You're leaving?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "We're leaving, both of us." Her lips pressed together to her. "Yes," he said, "but not the way she wants. We're going to make sure she can't hurt you again." The journey back to the city was quiet. They moved at dawn, using back roads and hidden paths. By midday, the tall towers of the central district rose ahead, their glass walls shining in the pale light. Leora stayed close to Daniel, her hand gripping his jacket. She didn't speak, but he could feel the tension in every step she took. Her stepmother's estate stood at the edge of the wealthiest quarter. Tall gates, guarded walls, and a garden so perfectly kept it looked unreal. The guards at the entrance stiffened when they saw Daniel. "We're here to see her," he said firmly. The guards exchanged glances. Then one of them went inside to announce their arrival. When they were led into the grand hall, Leora's stepmother was already waiting. She sat in a tall chair, dressed in rich fabrics, her hair shining like polished metal. Her smile was cold. "Well, well. You've saved me the trouble of sending for her," she said. Her eyes moved to Leora, sharp and calculating. "Come here, girl." Leora stayed where she was. Daniel stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "She's not going anywhere with you." The woman's smile didn't fade, but her tone grew sharper. "She is my responsibility, and she carries something that belongs to my family." Daniel's gaze shifted to the silver mark on Leora's wrist. "That mark belongs to her, not to you. And we both know what you've done to her since her father died." The stepmother's eyes narrowed. "You think anyone will believe the word of a human over mine?" Daniel pulled a small device from his pocket. "I don't need them to believe me. They can believe this." With a click, a projection lit the images and audio recordings Rurik had helped him gather. Footage from market cameras, witnesses, statements, and a recorded confession from one of her own men about being ordered to bring the girl back alive or dead. For the first time, the stepmother's expression faltered. She stood quickly, her voice rising. "You have no right. I have every right." Daniel interrupted. "Because the moment you threw her into the rain and left her to die, you gave up any claim you had." The sound of boots echoed through the hall as two officers entered. They had received the evidence hours before Daniel arrived. One stepped forward, speaking clearly. "By order of the district court, you are under arrest for conspiracy, attempted harm to a minor, and inheritance fraud." The stepmother's voice turned to venom. "You think you've won, human. She never belonged to you." Leora stepped forward then, her voice shaking but clear. "I don't belong to you either. You lost me the moment you chose greed over family." The officers took the woman away, her protests echoing through the hall until the doors closed behind her. Silence settled, broken only by the sound of Leora's uneven breathing. Daniel knelt in front of her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said. She blinked, as if trying to believe. "It over?" "Yes," he said. "You're free now." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting in her heart since the night they met. "Does this mean you'll be my dad?" Daniel smiled, the warmth reaching his tired eyes. "If you want me to?" Her answer came without hesitation. "I do." They left the estate together, walking through the city streets that had once felt so dangerous, now with her hand in his. The shadows seemed less dark. When they reached the edge of the city, Leora looked up at him. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere far," he said. "Somewhere safe. Where you can be a kid and not have to look over your shoulder." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. Leora tightened her grip on his hand. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew one thing for certain. This time, she wasn't walking into the rain alone.